You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who hasn't heard of the infamous Black Death in today's day and age. This disease ravaged Europe for years and ultimately resulted in the deaths of almost half the continent. While many people know where it came from and how exactly it caused such devastation in Europe, today I want to shine a light on some of the lesser known facts about this horrific disease. So without further ado, let's get straight into 5 lesser known facts about the Black Death. Even though the most devastating outbreak of the disease is the one we all remember during the 14th century, the bubonic plague was not a one and done affair. In fact, the Black Death persisted for centuries and caused many more outbreaks long after its initial arrival, including, but not limited to, the Great Plague of London in 1665-66, in which 70,000 residents died and was only halted due to the Great Fire of London, the Great Plague of Marseille, which resulted in the deaths of almost half the city's population, and in more recent times, what is known as the Third Plague Pandemic, which lasted over 100 years between 1855 and 1960, and killed up to 15 million people, mainly in India and China. The outbreak in the 14th century was also not the first instance of the disease in Europe, but I will be covering that in more detail later on in the list. As strange as it may seem, once the disease actually came to a halt in Europe, many people's lives actually improved. Due to the massive death toll, there were severe labour shortages all across Europe in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic. This scarcity of labourers led to higher wages for those who survived the plague, as they were able to demand better terms for their work. Additionally, and somewhat tragically, many people also inherited vast swathes of land from dead relatives, which alongside the aforementioned higher wages, resulted in an improved quality of life for the peasants and lower classes who survived the disease. Many people also believe that this shift in the balance of power heavily contributed to the gradual decline of feudalism in Europe. I think this is a more well-known fact, which I have been trying to avoid on this list, but this one always shocks me. After the years of devastation the Black Death caused in the mid-1350s, the population of Europe would not again reach pre-plague levels until 150 years later in the early 1500s. On this same note, another thing that I think is pretty crazy to think about is the insane proportion of the population at the time that died, around 50%. Imagine if something like that happened today. In my home country of Australia, for example, that would bring our population from 26 million down to 13, which really gives you a bit of an understanding of how horrific it must have been for the people at the time. Contrary to the infamous name it has today, people at the time did not call the disease the Black Death. In fact, this nickname was not used in English until the 1750s. At the time of the pandemic, there were a variety of names for the disease, with different nations using different ones. In England though, most contemporaries called it the pestilence, the Great Pestilence, the Plague, or the Great Death. I did promise I was going to go into more detail on this later in the video, so here it is. Just as the bubonic plague plagued Europe for centuries after the Black Death, it also plagued Europe prior to the massive outbreak we all remember today. The first large-scale outbreak of the bubonic plague in Europe occurred roughly 800 years before the Black Death and is known as the Plague of Justinian. The Plague of Justinian was first reported in 541 near Suez, Egypt, before it then spread to Constantinople, the Near East, and the entire Mediterranean basin, as well as much of the rest of Europe, including modern-day France, which was said to be severely affected by the disease. Unfortunately for the inhabitants of those regions at the time, the Plague of Justinian was not over in a couple years like the Black Death was, and reoccurred for centuries, only fully stopping in the mid-8th century. When it was finally all said and done, the outbreak, which during its peak was said to have killed 10,000 people a day in Constantinople, had cut short the lives of between 15 to 100 million people over its 200-year reign of terror. Well, there we have it, guys. Those were 5 lesser known facts about the Black Death. I know this video is a bit shorter than my usual ones, so if you guys would like to see more of these shorter style videos, do let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. But with all that being said and out the way, as always, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one.